The rain that night was relentless, as if someone was sobbing miserably, their streams of tears hammering against the window panes without a break. The glow of a street lamp filtered mistily through the fogged-up glass, making my bedroom feel even colder and more solitary. My name is John Smith. I'm just an ordinary guy in my 30s. I've been married for 4 years, and, for the last 6 months, I've been a father. And yet tonight I lie curled up in this empty room. Every tick of the clock makes my heart leap into my throat. It's not the rain, not the babies crying, nor is it trouble at work. I just missed my wife, madly. Ever since she gave birth to our son, everything changed in the blink of an eye. My wife, Eve, was once a tender and charming woman who fell asleep every night with her head on my shoulder. But after the birth, she grew distant, as if she had become someone else entirely. Her days were consumed by the baby, and I, her husband, seemed to have ceased to exist. At first, I thought it was normal. Her postpartum hormones were raging, and the sleepless nights caring for a newborn must have been exhausting her. I understood and sympathized. I even agreed that we should sleep in separate rooms for a while so she could more comfortably tend to our little one. But 6 months had passed, and I was still alone. This spacious master bedroom was mine alone, while Eve and the baby slept in the small room next to the kitchen, which had once been our home office. Initially, Id suggested we put the crib in our bedroom, but Eve had shaken her head firmly. "No, honey, this is more convenient for us. The baby wakes up all the time, and I don't want to disturb your sleep." The reason seemed logical, but over time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just physical distance. I felt an emotional chasm growing between us. Eve no longer looked at me with that familiar tenderness. She rarely initiated conversation. When I tried to talk to her, she'd avoid my gaze. Night after sleepless night passed, not because of a crying baby, but because of the emptiness in my heart. That evening, as I stepped out of the shower, the sound of the rain outside fell upon my warm body. I suddenly pictured Eve, wrapped in her comforter, holding our child. She must be cold, just like me. I quickly dried myself, threw on some light clothes, and stepped into the hallway. The house was silent, and the air carried the faint scent of baby formula mixed with the smell of something like Vicks VapoRub coming from my wife's room. I tiptoed to her door. I just wanted a quick glance at their faces before returning to my room. But just as I was about to touch the doorknob, I heard a very strange sound. It wasn't the baby crying or a lullaby. It was a whisper. I pressed my ear to the door. My heart began to pound. Despite the chill outside, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Carefully, I turned the knob and stepped inside. And then I froze. Eve was sitting on the floor, her back to the wall, her body trembling slightly. In front of her lay something black. As I looked closer, I saw it was the jacket from my wedding tuxedo. I stood there, paralyzed. My eyes saw everything, but my mind couldn't process any of it. Eve was clutching my old jacket, rubbing her face against it, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She was crying silently. "I'm sorry, Johnny. Forgive me. I don't have the right anymore," she whispered through her tears. I felt as if it'd been hit over the head. I didn't understand anything. Why was she saying that? The right to what? And what was she sorry for? I wanted to run to her, hold her, ask her everything, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. I hid in the slightly ajar doorway. The room was warm, but a shiver ran down my spine. Then I heard our son whimper. Eve hastily wiped her tears and picked him up. She kissed his forehead and began to soothe him, as if she hadn't been crying at all. She looked like any other mother, so much so that I began to wonder if what I had just seen was a hallucination. But I knew my wife's eyes couldn't lie. I slipped back to my room in silence. My heart was hammering. I don't have the right anymore. Eve's words echoed in my ears. I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, Eve, holding the baby, went to the kitchen to warm up his bottle, just like any other day. I sat at the table, pretending to look at my phone, but my entire focus was on her back. She looked so thin. It wasn't the fatigue of a new mother. It was the look of someone carrying an immense weight on her heart. I resolved to get to the bottom of it. But how? Should I ask her directly, or should I keep observing? I didn't want to suspect her, but something inside me, the husband and father in me, was screaming, "Something is very wrong. Somewhere in the darkness lay a truth I had yet to see. I decided to try again that night. The following evening, contrary to my usual habit, I didn't turn on the light in the bedroom. I lay on my side, my arm tucked under my head, staring blankly at the ceiling. The sound of raindrops falling from the roof seemed to strike my heart, cold and fast. It had been 6 months since Eve had given birth, 6 months since I'd been sleeping alone. I thought I should be used to it by now, but I wasn't. When I saw her the night before, clutching my old jacket like a treasure and weeping silently, I understood. Eve was hiding a secret. This wasn't just postpartum exhaustion or a rough patch, the excuses I'd been using to comfort myself. I'm not a suspicious person, but when a man is rejected by his wife for half a year, it's no longer just a matter of physical intimacy. It was a sense of loss, as if I had lost my place in her heart. And now, having seen her tears with my own eyes, I could no longer pretend that nothing was wrong. I left the bedroom door slightly ajar. The light from the hallway would let me see if anyone passed by. Around 11 p.m., I heard the shower running in the bathroom. It was Eve. It was her old habit to take a late shower after putting the baby to sleep. I got up quietly and walked barefoot down the hall, hiding beside the bathroom. The door wasn't fully closed, and hot steam billowed through the crack. Through that gap, I saw my wife's back, a thin, pale back. Her small shoulders hunched under the stream of hot water as if they were about to melt away. As she washed herself, she was sobbing quietly. No one else in the house could have heard that cry, but to me, it was a painful sound that tore at my heart. I didn't watch any longer. I didn't want to be a cowardly husband spying on his own wife. I went back to my room and collapsed onto the bed. My heart was racing, not with desire, but with worry. What burden was Eve carrying that made her torment herself in such solitude? Around midnight, I heard the baby's door open. Through half-closed eyes, I peered through the crack in my door. Eve gently laid our son in his crib and carefully tucked him in. Then, instead of going to bed, she sat on the floor and once again hugged my wedding jacket. The same jacket I thought she had thrown away because the shoulders were worn out. I couldn't take it anymore. I shot out of bed, strode to her room and threw the door open. "Eve!" She flinched, startled, and like a child caught red-handed, she hastily hid the jacket behind her back. She stared at me with wide eyes, biting her lip. "John, what are you doing?" I walked over and sat down beside her. With a trembling hand, I pulled out the jacket she was hiding. It was damp with fresh tear stains. I didn't ask her why she was crying. Instead, I said, "Why are you sitting here where it's so cold? If something's hurting you, why won't you tell me?" Eve looked up at me. Her eyes were red and bloodshot, and suddenly, she burst into loud sobs. She buried her face in my chest and clutched my shirt tightly, as if afraid I would disappear. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to look at you. I don't have the right anymore." "What are you talking about?" "What right?" In a trembling voice, Eve managed to get the words out. "I had serious complications during labor. The doctor said it might affect our intimate life. I was terrified, but I hid it from you. I was afraid you'd be disappointed, that you'd stop seeing me as the perfect woman. I was afraid you'd start looking for someone else." I was stunned. So that was it. It wasn't that her love had faded, or that there was another man. For the past 6 months, my wife had been isolating herself, pushing me away out of fear that she was no longer perfect. I held her tightly and stroked her head, as if comforting a small child. "You silly girl," was all I could manage to say. "You're my wife. No matter how your body changes, you are the woman I love most in this world. Do you think I married you for what happens in bed? You're the mother of our child and the pillar of this home. Why would you ever think you don't have the right?" Eve sobbed in my arms. I felt her tears soaking my shirt as I whispered, "Eve, let's stop sleeping apart. Come back to our bedroom. We're a marriage. And a marriage means we go through everything together, the good and the bad. Do you understand?" Eve nodded without a word. She leaned against my shoulder. I smelled the faint scent of her shampoo, a scent I had missed so desperately during those long, lonely nights. That night, for the first time in 6 months, Eve lay in our marital bed, but she still kept her back to me, facing the wall. I didn't touch her. I lay there quietly, feeling the breath of the woman I loved more than anything in the world. Not everything was back to normal, but at least Eve was no longer alone in the dark, and I no longer had to torment myself trying to guess what she was thinking. But I didn't know then that behind this guilt lay another secret. And when that secret came to light, I too would fall apart. After that night, when Eve agreed to move back into our bedroom, the atmosphere in the house grew much lighter. A weight lifted from my heart as well. It wasn't just about being close to my wife again, but the relief that the invisible wall between us had finally crumbled. Every morning, opening my eyes to see Eve sleeping with our son in her arms, felt like the happiness of our newlywed days had returned. I didn't want anything grand. My wife, my child, and an ordinary day together, that was enough. But my joy was premature. 3 days later, on a weekday afternoon, I came home earlier than usual because of a sudden downpour. Eve wasn't back yet. She had taken Leo to her parents' house that morning, saying his grandparents missed him. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house felt colder than usual, not from the rain, but from an unnatural silence. There was no hum of the bottle warmer, no sound of dishes being washed, no whir of the breast pump Eve always used when I was away. The empty house felt like a forgotten studio apartment. I dropped my bag and went into the bedroom. The room was tidy, the bed neatly made, but I noticed something odd. The drawer of the nightstand was slightly ajar. It was where Eve kept various documents, her postnatal supplements, and an old diary. My meticulous wife would never leave a drawer open like that. I hesitated for a moment, then bent down and pulled it open. A stack of papers caught my eye. They were folded and tucked neatly inside a cream-colored envelope. The logo of the University of Chicago Medical Center was printed on the side, the same hospital where Eve had given birth. I picked up the envelope. My hands trembled slightly. A cold premonition shot through me. Why would Eve hide her medical records here? Why hadn't she shown them to me, or kept them with Leo's papers? I opened the envelope. Inside were test results and prescriptions. Every line of printed text stabbed at my eyes like a sharp knife. Estrogen and prolactin levels abnormally elevated. Preliminary diagnosis: suspected pituitary gland irregularity. Patient exhibits symptoms of persistent anxiety and mild to moderate postpartum depression. I couldn't believe my eyes. Eve had postpartum depression. She had never mentioned it. Whenever I asked if she was okay, she would always smile and say, "Yes, everything's fine. I'm just a little tired. All new moms are." I sank onto the bed. I crumpled the paper in my hand, as if willing it to disappear. Tears streamed from my eyes, the tears of a pathetic husband who had lived beside his wife for months and failed to notice the pain she was carrying all alone. I opened the adjacent drawer. A small notebook with a purple fabric cover lay inside, the one where Eve jotted down little things. I opened it to the first page. October 2nd. Leo cried all night. My eyes burn, my body aches, and my husband sleeps like a log. I'm afraid to say how hard this is, afraid he'll look weak. October 14th. I look in the mirror and see a stranger. Dark circles under my eyes, hair falling out, a sagging belly. I hate how I look. October 25th. John fell asleep holding the baby. My heart is breaking in two. I love Leo, but I'm jealous of him. I'm afraid John doesn't need me anymore. Every sentence squeezed my heart. For the past few months, Eve had been living in such loneliness, pain, and guilt, and I thought I was showing her love and understanding by not demanding intimacy and not complaining. But I was wrong. I had been a terribly oblivious husband. My hand stopped on one sentence from November 10th. I had a strange dream. My husband was laughing happily with a much more beautiful woman. I woke up terrified, with the baby nursing at my breast. I cried without a sound. I put the notebook down and sat there, stunned. I felt like someone was clawing at my heart. I felt so guilty. Not because I had done anything specific, but because I had neglected my wife for so long. All she had needed was a tight hug and a gentle look that said, "You're not alone." That night, Eve and Leo came home late. I didn't ask her about the notebook or the medical records. The moment she walked into the entryway, I just pulled her into a tight hug. Eve froze for a second. "What's wrong, honey?" "Nothing. I just wanted to hug my wife." "Can't I?" She smiled faintly, but I could see a hint of emotion in that smile. Of course. I noticed her eyes were moist, but no tears fell. I put Leo to bed, turned back, and wrapped my arms around Eve. It felt as if I was trying to embrace all the difficult times she had endured alone. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay beside my wife, lost in thought. I knew this peace was temporary because there was still something she hadn't told me. The last page of the diary had been torn out, and I had a feeling that on that missing page lay Eve's deepest secret. And a week later, I discovered that secret. Not in a drawer, not on her phone, but from a man from Eve's past. A man I believed had vanished from her life forever. I've never been a jealous husband or one to dig into my wife's past. Everyone has memories of old flames. I do too. But after discovering the tear-stained diary and the medical diagnosis, something more than just concern took root in my heart. A vague but persistent premonition. A feeling that Eve was struggling not just with postpartum loneliness, but with something much bigger. It was a Saturday. I was standing in front of a CVS near our house to buy some vitamins for Eve when my phone rang. An unknown number. On the other end, I heard a calm, male voice. "Good afternoon. Am I speaking with John Smith?" "Yes, this is he." "Who's calling?" The man paused for a moment before saying, "My name is Mark Turner. I used to date Eve." I held my breath. My heart started pounding, and my mouth went dry. Mark. The name Eve had mentioned once, briefly, before our wedding. They had dated in college and then broken up for some vague reason. Eve never went into details, and I never asked. And now, this man was calling me. His voice didn't sound like someone trying to rekindle old feelings. It was careful and concerned. "What is this about?" Mark got straight to the point. "I know it's none of my business, but I happened to see Eve at the hospital recently. I think she was there for the baby's vaccinations. She didn't see me, but I watched her from the hallway for a while. She looked really unwell. She had dark circles under her eyes and seemed unsteady on her feet. She was holding the baby, but she looked like she was about to collapse." I gripped my phone tightly. Mark continued. "While she was sitting in the waiting room, she took out some pills. I recognized them. They're very strong antidepressants. I just wanted you to know, so you could take good care of her and help her. Eve is a very strong person, but when she breaks, she never shows it." A lump formed in my throat. I didn't see the rain, the passing cars, or the people around me. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. "How do you know they're antidepressants?" I asked, suppressing my emotions. Mark gave a bitter laugh. "Because I used to take them myself. I went through a bad depression, and Eve was the one who pulled me out of it back then. Now that she's in this situation, even though there's nothing between us anymore, I couldn't just ignore it." Clutching the phone, I tried to keep my voice as calm as possible. "Thank you for the information. I'll take care of her. But please, don't call again. I don't want my wife to be disturbed." Mark hesitated, then replied, "I understand. I'm sorry. I wish you both the best." The call ended. I stood there for a long time. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't jealousy, but an indescribable pain and sense of hopelessness. My wife, the woman I slept next to every night, ate with at the same table, and worried with about the cost of diapers and formula, was carrying such a storm in her heart, and I knew nothing about it. The fact that her ex-boyfriend, a man from her past, noticed it before I did made me feel even worse. When I got home, I said nothing to Eve. I just quietly watched her play with Leo. Her gaze was still tender, her voice gentle. But now I knew. I knew that beneath that tenderness lay a wound that was bleeding, a little more each day. That night, after Leo was asleep, I sat next to Eve on the bed and took her hand. "Eve, are you sure you're okay?" Eve flinched, then gave a slight smile and turned her head away. "I'm okay. Much better, really. I feel safe with you here." I gently squeezed her hand. "But I know you're taking medication. They're antidepressants, aren't they?" Eve froze. Her eyes widened in shock. She turned back to me and asked in a trembling voice, "Honey, you knew?" I nodded. "I'm not angry with you, but it hurts that you didn't tell me. Why did you try to carry such a heavy burden alone?" Eve lowered her head, her long hair obscuring her face. After a moment, her voice came, soft as a whisper. I was scared. Scared you'd worry. Scared that if I showed any weakness, you'd be disappointed that I wasn't the strong wife you used to know. Before she could finish, I pulled her into my arms. You silly girl, you're not a superhero. You're my wife and the mother of our child. You're allowed to be weak. You're allowed to lean on me. If you don't tell me, how am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to protect you? Eve burst into tears. Her tears soaked my collar as she clung to my shoulder. I hated myself for not being more observant, for not being closer when she was at her lowest. We sat like that for a long time. As the light in the room began to fade, Eve said in a quiet voice, "There's something else I didn't tell you." I looked at her. Eve bit her lip and said, "I think someone sent you a letter." "A letter?" Eve nodded, went to the closet, and took out an envelope, handing it to me. "I found it tucked in the door jamb yesterday morning when I was making Leo's bottle. There's no return address, but I think it's from Mark." I opened the letter. Just as she said, there were a few lines of handwritten text inside. "If you truly love her, protect her from the wounds in her heart. She doesn't need pity, just someone who will listen in silence." In that moment, I understood this was far from over. The storm in my wife's heart had not yet passed, and I had to take the helm of this ship and navigate it with her. After that night, I stopped ignoring Eve's subtle gestures, the furrowed brow, the vacant stare into space. She always put on a happy face, but her eyes didn't lie. They were like a deep, dark lake no one dared to enter. I took 3 days off work. I didn't explain the details to my colleagues. I just said I wanted to spend time with my family. Frankly, it was no longer a choice, but a necessity. I couldn't stand by any longer. I couldn't believe her seemingly calm facade and let her fight alone in the darkness of postpartum depression. On the first day of my leave, I stood before Eve and took Leo from her arms. The baby, used to his mother's embrace, fussed and wrinkled his face. Eve, who had just woken up, looked at me in surprise. "What's wrong? You're up so early." "I took a few days off. I want to spend some time with my wife and son." She was silent for a moment, then gave a sad smile. "I thought you were really busy." Instead of answering, I held Leo to my chest and patted his back, just as Eve always did. I thought then that a woman after childbirth is like a soldier on a battlefield without armor. Even the smallest shard of indifference from a loved one can inflict a deep wound. Around 9 a.m., while Eve was washing her hair, I happened to see her purple-covered diary on her vanity again. When I'd last read it, the final page was torn out. But now, strangely, a single, freshly written page was tucked between the torn edges. I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't read it without permission, but I had to know. I couldn't live in the dark anymore, relying on guesswork. With a trembling hand, I opened to that page. November 18th. I got a letter from Mark today. When I saw his handwriting, I thought my heart would stop. I thought I had forgotten everything, but memories don't disappear, they just fall asleep. After reading the letter, I cried for half the day. Not because I missed an old love, but because I felt so sorry for myself. I suddenly thought that if I hadn't met John that day, I might not be here anymore. Mark hurt me badly, but I never blamed him. I'm just so afraid that one day it'll cause John the same kind of pain. That's why I ran away, why I pushed you away. I was afraid that one day I would disappoint you. I thought if I was cold first, it would hurt less when you left. As I read this, I felt a stone settle on my chest. Eve, before she could even start over with me, was already preparing for me to leave her. I read on. But John didn't leave. He was still there, a little slow and clumsy, but he was the man I had trusted. And now, I'm scared of myself. When will this nightmare end? Sometimes, holding Leo and smiling, my hands tremble. Sometimes, standing by the window, I wonder if it would hurt much to jump from the second floor. Then I look at Leo. When I see his smiling face, I feel like such a coward. But if it weren't for you, I really might have done something stupid. I could no longer hold back my tears. Every word was a knife blade twisting in my heart. I couldn't even imagine that my wife, who seemed so strong and sensible, had been quietly standing on the precipice between life and death. Just then, the bathroom door opened. Eve, with wet hair and a towel in hand, saw me holding the diary and froze. There was no reproach or anger on her face, only deep disappointment. "You read it." I stood up and, without a word, went to her and held her tight. "I'm sorry. I couldn't wait for you to tell me yourself, but I couldn't stand by and do nothing any longer. You can be weak, but I have to be strong. If I don't protect you, our whole family will fall apart." Eve buried her face in my shoulder. She wasn't crying, but I could feel her rapid breathing and stifled sobs. "I'm sorry. I've been living in fear for so long. I thought I was protecting you, but I was actually hurting you even more. No, stop apologizing. I'm here. From now on, whatever it is, even if it's hard to say, you have to tell me everything." She nodded slightly. That day, for the first time in a very long time, we had breakfast together. No phones, no crying baby, just time spent looking into each other's eyes and communicating without words. I knew my wife's illness wasn't gone. The wounds in her heart were still there. But at least Eve had reopened the door to her heart. She had decided to stop pushing me away and fighting alone in the dark. I understood. Some storm don't pass overnight. But at least from today, we would stand together under one umbrella until the rain stopped and the sky cleared. And I still didn't know if Mark's letter was the final chapter of the past or the beginning of something far more complicated. One overcast afternoon, the wind blew through the window, gently rustling the thin curtains. Eve had just put Leo down for a nap, and I was at the desk in the living room, catching up on reports from my time off. A fragile peace settled over the house, a silence that could shatter at the slightest sound. Then, Eve's phone rang in the bedroom. The sound wasn't loud, but it was persistent. I glanced at the clock. It was 4:50 p.m. She had just lain down herself. I decided to answer for her so she wouldn't be disturbed. I quietly entered the room and glanced at the screen. Caller ID. Mark, do not answer. My heart stopped. Eve had promised she wouldn't contact her ex-boyfriend anymore. She had shown me the letter herself. Yet his number was still in her contacts, with that strange note. The phone kept ringing. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but I couldn't ignore it. After a moment of hesitation, I hit the decline button and quietly placed the phone on the nightstand. I didn't ask her about it right away. Instead, I watched her. That evening, I noticed Eve spent longer than usual in the bathroom with her phone. When I asked, she said she was texting friends in her mom's group on Facebook, but she avoided my eyes. Her haste in hiding her phone, whenever I walked in it, all fueled my unease. 2 days later, I received a call from an unexpected person. It was Eve's close friend from college, Sarah. I'd met her a few times when we were dating, but Eve had barely mentioned her since we got married. "John, is that you?" "It's Sarah, Eve's friend." "Hey, Sarah. What's up?" Her voice was cautious. "Sorry if I'm overstepping, but I thought you should know. It's about Mark." I tensed up. "What about him?" "I think Eve is still in contact with him. Not a lot, but it seems like Mark keeps trying to reach out. I only know because Eve logged into her Facebook on my laptop recently and forgot to log out. I accidentally saw their messages." "What were they talking about?" "Nothing scandalous." But Eve seemed conflicted, and Mark kept playing the understanding hero. "Something felt off, which is why I'm calling you. Not to make you jealous, but so you know the situation and can keep a close eye on your wife." I squeezed the phone. A mixture of anger, sadness, and worry washed over me. "Thanks for telling me, Sarah. I'll talk to Eve." I hung up. My heart felt like a block of ice. I wasn't jealous that she was talking to an ex. I'm not that kind of guy. But I was bewildered as to why she was hiding it. We had promised no more secrets. That night, after Leo was asleep, I sat beside my wife and asked as calmly as I could, "Are you still in touch with Mark?" Eve froze. Her face turned pale. Who told you?" "Nobody told me, but you don't have to hide it. You can tell me. I'm not angry about it, but your silence hurts me more." Eve lowered her head. After a moment, she said in a voice as soft as the wind, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide it. I was just ashamed." "Why?" "He messaged me, saying that since Head caused me so much pain in the past, he wanted to help now, even from a distance." that he wanted to at least listen when things were hard for me. When I read that message, I felt so pathetic because my heart, it wavered. Isayad. I'm not mad, I'm just sad. I understand your heart is in a vulnerable place, but you have to know where the boundaries are. If you won't let me be there for you, but you confide in another man, especially one who hurt you, how am I supposed to protect you? Tears welled in Eve's eyes. I know I was wrong. I blocked him right after. I didn't know I was so unstable. I thought I was stronger than this. I pulled her close. Everyone has weaknesses. I do, too. But from now on, when things are hard, tell me. When you're sad, take my hand. And when you're scared, look me in the eye. Don't go back to the past anymore. Your present is with me, Eve. My wife buried her face in my chest and cried like a child. I understood. No one is perfect. No one is entirely themselves after childbirth. But to love someone means not only being there for the joyful moments, but knowing how to hold on tighter when one of you is weak. After that night, Eve became much calmer. She started initiating conversations and even told me about the little fears she had kept hidden. I didn't blame her. On the contrary, I loved her even more because, to confess that truth, she had to overcome a fear far greater than the pain she had experienced. I deleted Mark's number from her phone, not to control her, but to close an old chapter. Instead, she just held onto the grab handle and stared out the window. Beyond the old winds, another storm I couldn't yet see might be waiting. After that night, the atmosphere in our home gradually warmed. Eve stopped hiding her feelings. She talked about the sadness and nameless anxiety she felt being alone with the baby all day within four walls. I, in turn, tried to leave work earlier to spend more time with her and Leo. I thought that would be enough to keep the peace. But inside my wife's body, unbeknownst to anyone, something else was growing, something with a destructive force of its own. It was a Monday morning. I was getting ready for work when Eve said, "Honey, can you drive me to the hospital? I'm feeling a little sick, and I have a follow-up appointment today." An appointment? For what? I was a bit surprised. Yeah, at that mental health and endocrinology clinic I went to last time. The results of my blood work are supposed to be in. And when you're scared, look me in the eye. I nodded, immediately put down my briefcase, grabbed the car keys, and we left. We dropped Leo off at my parents' for a little while. On the way to the hospital, Eve was strangely quiet. She didn't lean against me like she usually did, her arm around my waist. I was going to go by myself, but I'm feeling dizzy. At the hospital, the doctor invited us both into his office. He was a man in his 40s with a kind but serious face. Looking over her chart, Dr. Evans spoke slowly. "Mr. and Mrs. Smith, today we're going to discuss Eve's hormone and blood test results. There are a few things we need to pay close attention to." I took my wife's hand. It was cold as ice. First, even though it's been over 6 months since the delivery, Mrs. Smith's prolactin levels are still abnormally high. This isn't just due to breastfeeding. It could be a sign of a small pituitary tumor called a prolactinoma. It's benign, so please don't worry. It can be controlled with medication, but it can have a significant impact on her mood, hormones, and marital life. I felt as if a bucket of cold water had been dumped on me. I looked at Eve. She sat motionless, her expression unchanged, but her fingers were fidgeting nervously. The doctor moved on to the next results. Second, the blood tests show a severe iron deficiency, elevated liver enzymes, and mild anemia. This explains why she often feels dizzy, fatigued, anxious, and is particularly susceptible to depressive states. I squeezed my wife's hand tighter. A bitter taste filled my mouth. Everything was crashing down on us like waves. I thought it was just a psychological issue, and now there was a physical illness on top of it. Is it dangerous? My voice cracked. An untreated pituitary tumor can grow and affect vision, and also cause psychological disturbances. But thankfully, we've caught it early. What's important now is that the family stays close, provides care, and never leaves the patient alone. I looked at my wife. Only then did Eve slowly raise her head. Her eyes were moist. In a quiet voice, she said, "I've known about this for a month, but I didn't have the courage to tell you. I was afraid you'd worry." afraid that if it really was a tumor, it'd become a burden. I couldn't take it. I stood up, moved my chair next to hers, and took both of her hands in mine. Eve, listen to me. From the moment I married you, I was ready to spend my whole life with you. When you're sick and things are hard, I will never leave you. So please, don't hide anything. I don't want you to be strong. I want you to be honest. Eve buried her face in my hands and burst into tears. The doctor, watching us, nodded with a compassionate expression and explained the detailed treatment plan. Eve would take hormone-stabilizing medication for 3 months, and an MRI would determine the exact size of the tumor. At the same time, she would attend weekly therapy sessions. When we got home, Eve lay motionless in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. I sat beside her, made her some cream of wheat, and fed it to her with a spoon. She didn't eat much, but she didn't refuse. She looked like a helpless little child. "Are you scared?" I asked quietly. She nodded, but not of the illness. "I'm scared that one day I'll lose my mind and you won't recognize me. That's what terrifies me." I put the spoon down, leaned in, and whispered in her ear, "No matter how you change, I'm your husband. I won't let you disappear, not from my memory or my heart. I will be by your side until everything is okay." She started crying again, but this time she cried in my arms. I knew the coming days would be very difficult. The medication might make Eve more tired, apathetic, and prone to mood swings, but at least we had crossed the great threshold of truth together. And I silently thanked myself for not letting go of my wife's hand when everything started to turn gray. I don't know what the future holds, but one thing is certain: no matter how violent the storm that comes, I will never let my wife face it alone. Even if she one day forgets who she is, I will be there to tell her, "You are my wife, the mother of our child, and the woman I will love until the end of my life." After Eve was diagnosed with the pituitary tumor and began her treatment, our home entered a new phase, quiet but filled with a tense energy. When Eve wasn't looking, I would secretly wipe away tears, though she probably knew. Even though her body was exhausted and her mind unsettled by the medication, she became even more tender towards me. It was strange. I thought I was strong because I had never been weak. But when the person you love becomes fragile, you realize that you too become more vulnerable alongside them. I took a week off work to care for my wife and child at home. During the day, I administered her medication and prepared meals. At night, I kept watch, afraid Eve would get dizzy on her way to the bathroom or wake up crying. And one night, as the rain poured down, Eve told me the story she had kept hidden in the deepest corners of her heart for the past 6 months. That night, I was massaging her shoulders, where she had applied a heating patch against the chill. Eve lay with her back to me, silent for a long time, before asking quietly, "Honey, do you remember the night I gave birth to Leo?" I nodded. She couldn't see it, but how could I forget? It was the longest night of my life. Waiting outside the delivery room, my hands clenched until they were numb, and then the baby's first cry, which released all the tension. "I remember." "And I don't," Eve said slowly. Towards the end, I almost lost consciousness. My whole body was shaking like I was dying. When I came to, the doctor said the bleeding was worse than they'd expected, that I was lucky I didn't need another surgery. I squeezed her hand tighter. "You never told me about that." My voice broke. "Because if I had, you would have blamed yourself for not being able to protect your wife," she said with a faint smile. "But it's not the pain I remember most. It's the fear." I was lying in the pre-op room, and from the bed next to me, I could hear a woman screaming that she'd lost her baby. Then the doctors shouting, the beeping of machines, and I was just lying there, shaking with terror. I couldn't even open my eyes. I was speechless. "You heard something that horrible?" "Yes." I thought, maybe it would have been easier if I had just died then. He fell silent. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was afraid if I spoke, I would break down crying. "But then," she continued, "through the glass doors, I heard your voice. My wife? Is she okay? Please, save my wife." You were shouting. Her voice trembled. I was stunned. I never thought Eve remembered that moment. It was then that I thought, I have to live. No matter how much it hurts, no matter how scared I am, I have to live and get back to my husband and my baby. With a trembling hand, I took hers. You know, behind those doors, I was praying that if I could just take your pain onto myself, I would do it in a heartbeat. I know. She smiled through her tears. That's why I'm still alive today. To love you all over again, from the beginning. After that night, there was no more distance between us. Not because of sweet words, but because we had seen each other at our most vulnerable and still stayed. And that night, Eve told me one more story, a story that sent a chill down my spine. In her 6th month of pregnancy, she had considered abortion. I froze. I thought that even if I had the baby, I wouldn't have the strength to raise him right. That if all I could give him was the shadow of a mother, it would be better if he wasn't born at all. But one night, I had a dream. A little boy in a yellow onesie ran up to me, hugged my legs, and smiled brightly. I asked him, "Who are you?" And he said, "Mom, it's me, your little nugget. Don't give up on me." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I hugged her tightly. "You are the most wonderful mother I know, Eve. Our child chose you to come into this world, and so did I. No matter what, never think you're not enough or that you're weak. Just be you. For me and for our son, that's more than enough." From that day on, Eve started writing in a diary again, but this time it wasn't pages stained with tears. It was a new diary with a white cover. She said it was a new beginning for a mother. She wrote about her feelings when Leo started to crawl, about the days the medication made her nauseous, about the times I messed up the formula but I was so clumsy she forgave me. She was learning to forgive herself, to allow herself to be weak, and to lean on me without reservation. But it wasn't over. 3 weeks later, at a checkup, her doctor found something unexpected. In addition to the pituitary tumor, another small nodule was found near her thyroid. Biopsy results indicated a high probability it was benign, but it had to be monitored. When Eve heard the news, she just smiled faintly and said, "I guess my body wants to test you one more time." I looked at her, pulled her into a tight hug, and whispered in her ear, "It's okay. It can test me as much as it wants, as long as you're by my side." She smiled. This smile was no longer forced like before. It was like a ray of sunshine, even as storms continued to rage around us. And I believed that with that smile, I could walk to the end of the earth. When I heard the news about another nodule near her thyroid, I thought Eve would break down. But she didn't. She looked at the doctor, smiled, nodded, and said something I'll never forget. "It's all right, doctor. I've made it this far because I know how to laugh." In that moment, I squeezed her hand tightly. My heart was full of fear, but at the same time, I was in awe of my wife. This small, delicate woman who was once so fragile, who had wanted to give up, who had even contemplated death, was now showing the strongest will of us all. I realized some wounds aren't on the skin but are etched deep in the soul, and only someone who has walked through that pain can move forward with such strength. On the way home, I suggested we go out for dinner. She said she was a bit tired, but I made a reservation at a small restaurant by the lake, a place Eve loved back when we were dating but couldn't afford. After everything we'd been through, I wanted to take her back there. Not to reminisce, but to affirm that we had navigated so many of life's twists and turns together. Sitting in the restaurant, Eve watched the yellow lights reflecting on the lake and sighed softly. I used to think that once I had a baby, everything would be perfect. I'd be loved by my husband, raise a beautiful child, and live happily. I never imagined it would be the most difficult time of my life. "Yeah," I said. "No one teaches you how to be a mother, and no one teaches a husband how to protect his wife after childbirth. Remember?" She smiled faintly. "I used to hug your jacket in the bathroom and feel like I was dreaming. A dream called before the baby." I couldn't say anything. I thought if I just played my part well, everything would fall into place and I'd be happy. I tried to be a good mother, a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, a good daughter, and I forgot how to be Eve. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, "that I didn't see it sooner. I thought by earning money, I was helping you. I didn't know that was when you were at your loneliest." She shook her head. "But because of it, I learned how to love myself again. In the past, if I got sick, I would have hidden it from you and suffered alone. But now I know that by doing that, I would be taking away your right to love me." Her words surprised me. "The right to love me? What do you mean?" "I used to think that if I was strong and sacrificial, you would value me. But now I know that true love is accepting the other person, even when they're weak. If I hide all my pain, I'm denying you the chance to love all of me." I took her hand. I felt my eyes sting. "You're right. From now on, don't keep anything locked away. I want to love you in every way, at any cost." She smiled. For the first time in months, I saw her full, genuine smile. Not pale, not hiding anything. The smile of a woman who had walked through a deep valley and was finally standing firmly on her own 2 feet, with a husband by her side who had never let go of her hand. That night, back home, Eve handed me a small object wrapped in a tissue. "I want to give you something. It's a piece of a memory I once wanted to tear out, but now I want to keep it. So I don't forget what I overcame." I unwrapped the tissue. Inside was an old, crumpled piece of paper. The very same page from her diary that she had torn out. The writing was blurred with tears but still legible. "If I ever disappear, please tell my husband that I really tried. That I loved him, but I didn't know how to say it." I folded the paper and carefully placed it in my wallet. "You did disappear." My voice trembled. "You're right here. You chose to live, and I'm going to live all our remaining days with you." She nodded, her eyes shining like stars. "One more thing," she said, her voice light. "I canceled my therapy appointment for next week. The doctor said having my husband by my side is more effective than any medicine." I burst out laughing. "So, from now on, am officially your living prescription?" Eve winked. "This medicine works slowly, but it has no expiration date." We laughed together. Just then, a cry came from the crib. Eve started to get up, but I stopped her. "Tonight, the living prescription will show you what he can do." She laughed out loud. The mother who was once on the verge of collapse was now, in her warm home with her husband and child, laughing like a flower that had just bloomed after a long storm. I don't know what the future holds for us. The illness, the fatigue, the stress might not be gone, but I am sure of one thing. No matter how things change, we will keep walking forward, holding hands, with a love that heals all wounds. It seemed like everything was returning to normal. The illness was under control, and Eve's mental state had improved. We were starting to reclaim our quiet daily life, but another trial was coming from an unexpected direction. It was after 11 p.m. that night. I had just put Leo to sleep and stepped out of his room when I heard a frantic knocking at the door. I peeked through the window. It wasn't raining. The street was empty. Eve was resting in our room. The hormone medication made her nauseous and tired in the evenings. I told her to rest and went to the door. "Who is it?" "It's me, your mother." "Open up, quickly." I froze. My mother-in-law? No, it was my own mother, Carol, who lived in a small town a few hours away. She rarely called, let alone visited without notice, especially in the middle of the night. When I opened the door, my mother stood there, her face pale, her hair a mess, holding nothing but a small purse. "Mom, what happened?" "Did you take the late train?" "Yes. I have to talk to you." "It's very important," she said, her voice trembling. I led her inside. Sitting on the couch, my mother stared at the closed door of the room where Eve was lying. "Is the baby asleep?" "Yes." "What's wrong, Mom? You're scaring me." My mother looked at me for a long time before suddenly saying, "I have committed a great sin against your wife. I must see her and beg for her forgiveness." "Son, I did a terrible thing." I was completely bewildered. My mother was a traditional woman, loving but stern. She and Eve didn't have a warm relationship, but she had never been unkind or disrespectful. Why was she saying such strange things now? Tears welled in my mother's eyes. When I found out Eve was pregnant, I was happy, but also very worried. I'd heard that it's hard for a woman who has had a miscarriage to carry a baby to term. As you know, Eve lost her first baby. I was taken aback. I hadn't told her the details. Maybe Eve had mentioned something, or she'd heard it from someone else. "So," she continued, "I went to see this spiritual advisor, a woman named Madame Rosa. She said your wife has a strong, dark aura that was preventing the baby from coming into the world safely. To deliver the baby, we had to remove the bad energy from her body. "Mom," I said, my face turning pale. "What did you do?" I took a photo of Eve and had it burned with a talisman that was supposed to ward off evil spirits. Madame Rosa said under no circumstances was I to tell Eve. I just wanted my grandson to be born healthy. I shot up from my seat, my blood boiling. "Mom, what picture?" "What picture was it?" "Your wedding photo." I had a copy. I didn't know it would have such consequences. But a few days ago, that woman contacted me again. She said the bad energy wasn't gone. In fact, it had latched onto her even more tightly. When I heard that, I came to my senses. I remembered how pale and sad and tired Eve looked. I got so scared, I immediately got on a train and came here. I was speechless. A lump formed in my throat, and a cold sweat ran down my back. All this time, while Eve was battling her loneliness, a blind superstition had been pushing her into an even deeper abyss. My mother had done it for her son, but her method was like plunging a knife into the heart of her fragile, wounded daughter-in-law. Suppressing my anger, I said, "Mom, do you have any idea what you've done? Eve has been suffering from severe depression. I almost lost my wife. Do you understand that?" My mother burst into tears. I know everything now. I'm truly sorry. I didn't know it would turn out like this. Everything I did backfired. Now, I just want to kneel before your wife and beg her for forgiveness." I sank back onto the couch. Just then, the door to our bedroom opened. Eve was standing there, leaning against the doorframe, her face pale. "Mom, I heard everything." My mother and I turned, shocked. Eve slowly walked towards us. Her legs were a bit unsteady, but her gaze was strangely calm. "Mom, you don't have to kneel. I don't blame you, but my heart aches. Not because you believe in that, but because you didn't believe in me." My mother broke down, sinking to the floor. "I'm so sorry, dear. I'm so sorry. I was so foolish. I saw you getting thinner and suffering, and I thought it was because of some bad energy. It never occurred to me that I was the one hurting you even more." Eve walked over and helped her up. Her hands were trembling, but she held my mother's shoulders firmly. "It's okay. I'm a mother now, too. I understand that every mother is afraid of losing her child. But Mom, next time you want to help me, please trust me, not someone else. Don't hurt me again, in the name of love." My mother, nodding, hugged Eve and sobbed. I watched the two women, the woman who was once a mother and the woman who had just become one, holding each other in the middle of the night. My heart ached. So many misunderstandings and conflicts had finally come to light. I understood. A family isn't just about love. It's a place that requires immense understanding, forgiveness, and communication. That night, my mother slept at our house. 3 adults and 1 baby in one small apartment, but no one said another word. I believed that this silence was the most powerful medicine, healing wounded hearts. I squeezed Eve's hand tightly. She rested her head on my shoulder, closed her eyes, and smiled faintly. We thought the storm had passed, but it was still there. This time, though, we were no longer afraid. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. Our son was sleeping peacefully in his crib. I opened my eyes to see Eve folding clothes beside the bed. Her face looked more peaceful than ever. My mother was also up early, making oatmeal in the kitchen. Her back was a little hunched, but her hands moved quickly, as if trying to wash away her past mistakes. Leaning against the doorframe, I quietly watched the 2 women in my life. One gave birth to me, the other I chose for life. They were no longer strangers to each other. After a long night of tears and misunderstanding, I cherished the peace of this new day. When I entered the kitchen, my mother was tasting the oatmeal, a frown on her face. "Too salty." My hands shake in my old age. Eve smiled. "It's okay, Mom. Better than bland. Well, just add a little more water." My mother looked at Eve, her eyes a mixture of shame and gratitude. "After how I treated you, you're still so good to me." Eve just smiled. She no longer felt any resentment. She knew that some wrongs shouldn't be punished, but resolved with a warm embrace and gentle silence. After breakfast, my mother and I talked on the patio. "All my life, I've just followed my instincts," she said. "I thought everything I did for my child was right. But now I understand. Love without understanding only hurts. I'm sorry, son. And I hope I still have a chance to make things right with Eve. I took her rough hand. Of course you though, Mom. There are plenty of chances. If your heart is sincere, well, never turn you away. Our family doesn't need perfect people, just people who want to protect each other. My mother nodded. A tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of relief. That afternoon, my mother took me to a local market. She stopped at a jewelry stand. Mom, what are we doing here? I want to buy Eve a bracelet. It's not to make amends. It's to thank her for not pushing me away. I used to think you couldn't truly love a daughter-in-law because you don't share blood. But Eve changed my mind. I couldn't say anything. A lump formed in my throat. Sometimes a storm widens a person's heart and helps them understand what is real. My mother chose a delicate silver bracelet. Inside, small words were engraved: love, understanding, forgiveness. When I smiled, my mother said, "That's my handwriting. I want Eve to look at this and remember she has a mother-in-law who once made a mistake but is now learning all over again." When we got home, my mother quietly gave Eve the gift. Eve took the bracelet, looked at the inscription, and smiled. There was no fanfare or drama, but in that one look, they both understood that everything was okay. That evening, passing by our room, I saw Eve writing in her white diary. I stood quietly behind her, not wanting to disturb her. She finished writing, closed the diary, and turned to me. "Do you want to read this one too?" "Can I?" "Yes. This diary isn't a place where I hide anymore. It's a place we write together." I opened it to the first page. There was a very short line. "I used to think I was a wife who had failed. But now I know, as long as you are loved and know how to love, there is no such thing as permanent failure." I looked up at my wife. Her eyes were bright. Without a word, I pulled her into a hug. No words were needed. The fact that our hearts were still beside each other was the most perfect answer to all the wandering and the pain. Eve took her medication regularly and ate well. Sometimes she practiced yoga at home. I bought her a small radio so she could listen to calm music in the morning. The atmosphere in the house improved dramatically. Especially after my mother's visit, the two women, to my surprise, became the best of friends. "Eve, this chicken soup needs a good broth, or it's not soup." "Then you have to teach me, Mom. From now on, I'm going to learn how to be a daughter-in-law who can please her picky mother-in-law." The sound of their laughter from the kitchen made me, sitting in the living room reading the paper, smile. Maybe true love begins when you see each other at your worst. And when one is sick, the other doesn't run away. And when one makes a mistake, the other doesn't stay silent. And if there is such a thing as a miracle, it is the honesty and understanding between people living under the same roof. Time passed, and nearly 2 months had gone by since Eve started her treatment. Everything had calmed down. Eve stopped rushing and pretending to be strong. Every morning, I would prepare her a glass of warm water with honey. Eve would laugh and say, "Honey, if you keep taking care of me like this, it'll get better too fast and I won't have an excuse to be spoiled." I would just smile. I wanted nothing more than her full recovery. I would rather be a husband who catered to her whims for the rest of his life than watch her weep silently again. However, one night, when I thought everything was back to normal, Eve had a terrible nightmare. It was an unusually hot night. I was asleep when my wife started gasping and thrashing in the sheets. I shot up. "Eve, what's wrong?" Eve's eyes flew open. Her face was pale, her hair and pillow soaked with sweat. "I saw blood," she gasped. "The doctor said I lost the baby." I was screaming, but no one could hear me. "And you? You were holding another woman's baby in your arms. You were laughing, and you turned your back on me." I was speechless. I pulled her close and gently stroked her head. "It was a dream, Eve. Just a dream. I'm here, and our son is sleeping peacefully in his crib. Look." Eve curled up against my chest like a small child, trembling. She wasn't crying, but the shaking wouldn't stop. I thought I was better. Why am I having dreams like this? Because the wounds in your heart haven't fully healed yet. You've become stronger, but old wounds heal slowly. It's okay. Well, get through it together. Isn't it hard for you? She whispered. It is. But with you, I can walk any distance and wait any length of time." Eve buried her face in my neck and whispered, "And if I were to betray you in a dream one day, would you forgive me for that too?" I froze for a second. Not out of anger, but at such an unexpected question. "Why do you ask that?" "Sometimes I feel like I'm not myself. I do strange things, have terrible thoughts. I'm afraid that one day, I'll lose control." I lifted her face and looked her straight in the eye. "If you ever change, I will learn to love you all over again. It's not your fault. The illness is the monster, but you don't have to be afraid of it alone." Eve looked at me for a long time, then closed her eyes and nodded. I knew that slowly, very slowly, she was rebuilding her faith that someone would stay with her until the end. The next day, Eve decided to do something she had been putting off for a long time: write a letter to her past self. She sat at the desk and wrote carefully. I didn't disturb her, just sat beside her, occasionally placing a hand on her shoulder. After a while, she folded the letter and handed it to me. "Honey, you keep this. If I ever feel weak again, read it to me." I opened the letter. It was her familiar handwriting, but this time there was no despair in it. "To the Eve who once broke down, you really suffered. It was hard, and you wanted to disappear, but you overcame it. You survived. You have a child, a husband, and a real family. You are not perfect, but you are brave. If you ever feel yourself faltering again, remember, no one is asking you to be strong forever. Just be honest, and never doubt that you are worthy of love." As I read it, my hand trembled slightly. I folded the letter and gently kissed her on the forehead. "You're not just worthy of love. You're worthy of being protected for a lifetime." From that day on, before going to sleep, we would tell each other one good thing that had happened that day. Lau's laugh. The soup Eve had seasoned perfectly. They were small things, but with each passing day, Eve's heart seemed to become more nourished, slowly healing. And I realized this was a time of healing not just for Eve, but for me too. Because when you love someone deeply, you heal not only the other person but your own wounds as well. That night, I asked my wife, "Are you still afraid of that dream?" She shook her head. "No, because I know that before the dream can swallow me whole, you'll wake me up." I smiled and held her tighter. "And if I don't wake you up in time, I'll come into that dream and pull you out myself." She laughed and said quietly, "Then I can sleep peacefully. No matter the dream, you'll be with me." One late autumn afternoon, I was making tea while Eve sat on the floor, folding baby clothes and humming a quiet lullaby. Her voice was no longer broken, but clear and gentle, like her soul after weathering so many storms. Suddenly, looking at my wife, I felt a strange sensation, as if I were falling in love with a new person. Not the young girl full of expectations, nor the woman tormented by the pressure to be a perfect homemaker. This was a person with scars on her shoulders, but who was truly mature. That afternoon, I suddenly suggested, "Eve, how about we go on our first family trip this weekend?" Eve looked at me, surprised. "Where to?" "Anywhere you want, as long as it's you, me, and our son." "Well, rest a bit, and spend more time just looking at each other." Eve was silent for a moment, then she smiled. "How about Wisconsin? We always wanted to go to one of the lakes there, but we kept putting it off because Leo was too small, or I wasn't feeling well, or we were too busy. Let's not put it off anymore." She nodded. A faint spark of excitement appeared in her eyes, but it was enough to make me believe she was truly coming back to life. 3 days later, we arrived at a small cabin nestled by a quiet lake in Wisconsin. There were no luxuries, no hustle and bustle, just sunlight filtering through the pine trees in the morning and the sound of crickets at night. Our son was thrilled. He touched wet grass for the first time, listened to the gurgle of a stream behind the cabin, and on the first day, Eve slept through the entire morning. I hadn't seen her sleep so deeply and peacefully in a long time, with no nightmares, no cold sweats. When she woke up, I sat beside her and whispered, "When I watch you sleep so peacefully, I feel like I have the whole world." Eve turned to me. "And what is having the whole world? You, our son, and today?" She snuggled closer to me and, as if searching for a piece of a beautiful dream, buried her face in my chest. As if afraid the gentle atmosphere would vanish, she said in a quiet voice. "I used to think that if it weren't for all these crises, our life would have been calmer. But now, I think it's because of them that I've come to understand you so deeply. And it's because of them," I added, "that I've understood that loving your wife isn't just about holding her when she's beautiful but also wiping her tears. Right, Eve?" She laughed out loud. "In that case, we love each other in the most honest way possible." I nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude for a life that had allowed us to walk through the darkness together. That afternoon, while Leo was napping, Eve and I walked hand in hand along a dirt path behind the cabin. 2 rows of tall grass and a gentle breeze. It was as if time itself had sat down somewhere to rest. Eve suddenly stopped and asked, "Honey, later on, when I'm old, my hair is gray, my eyes are weak, and I keep forgetting things, will you still hold my hand and walk with me like this?" I squeezed her hand tighter. "Not just hold your hand. If you're tired, I'll give you a piggyback ride. And if that's too hard, I'll push your wheelchair. You just have to be with me." She gently kissed my cheek and smiled happily. "Then I'll try to remember all the days I've spent with you, and if my memory ever betrays me, I'll engrave you on my heart." On our last night there, Eve turned on the voice recorder on her phone and asked us to record something together. "So, if I ever forget, you can play this for me." She pressed record. In the cool night air, her voice rang out. "To the future, Eve. Hi. If you're listening to this, it means your memory is playing hide and seek with you. But don't worry. Your husband, John Smith, is always beside you. He loves you every single moment. You have a wonderful son, and to protect this family, you've weathered many storms. You were weak, you were scared, you wanted to give up, but in the end, you survived, and you are living more beautifully than ever. Don't be afraid of anything. You are not alone. You are loved." Looking at my wife, I was speechless. For the first time, she was speaking of love for herself. Eve looked at me and smiled. "I'm not the same wife I used to be. I'm a new person, braver, more honest, and aware of my own worth." I hugged her and whispered, "And I'm a new husband, one who knows how to love his wife's soul, even its most fragile parts." This wasn't a vacation. It was a return. To each other, to ourselves, and to a love that no longer carried the weight of expectations. I understood. After the dreams, the forgetting, and the many surrenders, what remains is a true love, deep enough to endure and vast enough to forgive. And in that love, we, 2 ordinary people with ordinary wounds, had found peace. After returning from Wisconsin, the atmosphere in our home changed. Everything slowed down, warmed up, and it became easier to breathe. The old, petty arguments, the sharp glances, the heavy sighs, they all disappeared. In their place came the sound of our son's laughter, the clinking of coffee mugs in the morning, and the song Eve hummed while watering the flowers out front. Eve said, "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm not just existing, I'm living." Hearing that, my heart melted, because I knew how she had once lived in the shadow of duty, guilt, and self-criticism. I no longer checked my wife's phone or worried about her texts. Not out of a lack of interest, but out of trust. A trust that had been born from the time we had weathered together. It wasn't blind trust anymore. It was the fruit of many tears, late-night conversations, and the hands that held her when she was weak. One morning, while I was still asleep, Eve snuggled into my chest and whispered, "I've forgiven myself, honey." I opened my eyes, stroked her hair, and smiled. "You've done something no one else could do. And I've forgiven your mother," she added. When you think about it, she was also a woman going through a postpartum period, just like me. Only back then, no one held out a hand to her. That's why she became so hard and stern. I was speechless with admiration. My wife, whom I once thought was weak, had become the strongest and wisest person in our home. On weekends, we started writing in our diary together. She would write a paragraph, then I would write one. We recorded happy moments, like the day our son stood up on his own for the first time, but also sad ones, like the day Eve couldn't remember the name of a friend she'd been close to all 4 years of college. I asked her, "Arent, you sad that your memory is slowly fading?" She smiled. "No, because there's one thing I'll never forget. You." I looked at her as if she were the most precious treasure. "I promise, if you forget again, I'll tell you everything all over again." In the same voice, with the same smile, all the memories we've lived together. "And if you even forget your own name, I'll give you a new one. A name that only the two of us will know." Eve once told me, "True love isn't the flame you have at the beginning of a marriage, but the ability to take care of each other even when everything is falling apart." Those words stayed with me. I too had been angry when she refused my affection. I had been irritated when she was forgetful. I had suspected her when she was secretly texting her ex. But now I know, great love isn't about deciding who is right, but having the courage to stay and heal each other's wounds. Eve didn't leave, and neither did I. We walked through a very deep darkness, and it was there that we found the light. One afternoon, Eve, holding our son's hand, went out into the yard. She put him in his rain boots and let him splash in the puddles. The child laughed out loud, and Eve kept saying, "Be careful you don't slip." I watched them from inside. The raindrops on the window glistened. In that scene, I saw something precious that I had once overlooked. Happiness isn't the absence of storms, but the peace of heart that allows you to walk through them, holding hands. That night, I drew the curtains, dimmed the lights, and sat beside Eve as she put Leo to sleep. She turned to me and asked quietly, "Isn't it hard?" "What is?" "Living with a wife who had depression, who had dark thoughts, who cried every night while hugging her husband's clothes." Without hesitation, I took her hand. "It was hard when you were hiding it from me, but loving you has never been hard, not even once." She smiled through her tears, and I thought I no longer had the right. "Just by being alive, you are fully deserving." Late that night, after Leo was asleep, I wrote a paragraph in our family diary in careful script. Today, my wife laughed a lot. She doesn't forget things as often as she used to, but I still tell her our old stories, so she remembers how much we loved each other. She was sick, she broke down, she ran away, but she was the one who taught me how to love properly. And I am lucky enough to still be here, being loved all over again by this woman every day. Eve read it and said nothing. She just placed her hand on my chest and whispered, "The most peaceful place in the world is your heart." On a windy night, I held my wife and thanked life for all its storms, because it was through them that I understood how precious the peace we now have is. One December evening, as a cold wind seeped through the cracks in the door, Eve and I were sorting through faded family photos. Our son played with his toy cars on the living room rug, occasionally looking up to give us a bright smile. Outside, our neighbors had already started putting up their Christmas decorations, and the yellow and red lights blinked with a steady, heart-like rhythm. I looked at Eve, the woman who had gone through the pain of childbirth, battled postpartum depression, struggled with delusions, and endlessly doubted her qualifications as a mother and wife. Now, she was smiling as she mended the torn fragments of our memories, calmly putting them in order. She wasn't fully healed, but she was strong enough to stand up, to love life, and to forgive herself. I used to think that great love was about grand sacrifices or romantic gestures. But after all this, I understood. Great love is hidden in the small, trivial things we often overlook. A gentle touch of the hand in the middle of the night, a silent glance when the other person looks tired, a glass of water quietly offered after they take their medicine, or simply not leaving your loved one's side when they are at their weakest. I learned that when a woman gives birth, she doesn't just deliver a child, she gives birth to a new version of herself, more fragile, more sensitive, and in need of more comfort. If the husband by her side doesn't have the patience to accompany her on that journey, she can, crushed by the weight of her social roles as mother, wife, and daughter-in-law, lose herself completely. Eve once asked who she was, but now she can answer with a smile. I am Eve, John's wife, Leo's mom, a woman who was once weak but never gave up, and I, just an ordinary husband, learned something very valuable. Never let the woman by your side be forced to become strong alone.